Adaptability skills, it's going to be hard for you to move from one to another quickly.
You can kind of change your course without negatively impacting the outcome. So you'll still get the desired outcome that you wanted, but you might just get there a different way.
And we find that that's the most compelling part of this work is how do we equip them to thrive in that rapidly changing and very complex world.
Accepting and valuing those who are different from us is at the core of global empathy.
Global empathy was something big that I learned from Columbus North International High School. It's a school where there's literally represents over 20 different countries. So many different languages are spoken at that school.
And it's very normal for me to see a kid say, hola, and then ni hao. I think that's one of the most beautiful things. We don't feel different, we feel unique. The difference is it became an asset. It's not like something we have to hide.
Columbus City Schools, I think as an organization, really allows for an unprecedented level of multicultural exposure, more than our surrounding district counterparts. We are so diverse here.
We serve lots of economic levels, so it's a multifaceted district.
And our kids see things differently. They're incredibly diverse, right? Much more acceptance of people who aren't like them, whether it be sexual orientation or race or gender identity.
If you haven't guessed by now, we see our diversity as one of our biggest strengths.
In order for us to fully realize that as a strength, we also have to be curious about one another's perspectives, life experiences, and the assets they bring to the table.
You should be there for your fellow human. And I think that it's important to teach kids that as young as we can.
I like my friends because they share. And by my friends, I don't want to make them angry or sad. I just want to cheer them up and make them happy.
Different people doesn't mean different things. Like, say a person's lighter than you. What does that mean?
You meet so many new people, different people. You get to know all these different cultures because you meet friends from countries you've never even heard from.
The world is bigger than just ourselves.
If you think of the world as all just one skin color, one religion, one culture, it's gonna be more boring because you're not gonna understand how other people feel.
The ability to be able to disagree and to be able to articulate your opinions and perspectives without being, confrontational necessarily, but also listening to one another.
Accepting and valuing those who are different from us is at the core of global empathy. It's about taking action to celebrate and protect our differences.
They are our leaders right now. They are pushing us to be better and to think better as grown-ups. And that's exactly what we need and what we're looking for.
The death of George Floyd, added an additional layer that we have kind of swept under the rug for a long time, and that's around inequity and racism.
Our students were a vital part of helping our entire community know that there were things that we just can't tolerate as citizens. And we want our students to be change agents, and they really showed us that they could be. And I think we're very proud of that as a district, to know that our students are willing and able to stand up for the things that they know are right.
This is the place where I live too. We always want to make the world a better place, so why not start now instead of waiting until it's too late?
We have to continue to march, continue to protest, continue to converse.
greatness doesn't just happen. It is created one step at a time. A skyscraper starts with one plan. A masterpiece starts with one simple brushstroke. And a student fully prepared to lead and serve begins with one community pulling together for the benefit of all. One teacher can inspire. One caring adult can support. One idea can change everything. Over the next 5 years, Columbus City Schools is embarking on a path guided by our students and their families.
To our students, you are the reason that we're doing all of this important work. It is important for us that you are successful. Now we're more intentional. Now we're focusing on the priorities that we believe are important for our students right now. Our portrait of a graduate is Columbus City Schools community coming together, stating that these are our hopes and dreams and aspirations for our students. We must put our students out front. They can do it. They have demonstrated across our district and other places that if you provide for them the environment for them to thrive, they can do the unimaginable. Now we have 4 priorities that we are focused on. Columbus City Schools will be whole child focused. And what that means is that we will focus not only just at academic, but also social and emotional well-being of our students. Equitable opportunities for all students in Columbus City Schools means that every student, regardless of your background, will have an opportunity to be successful. Strong learning communities in every region means regardless of where our students go, we have to make sure that our students are learning in 21st century facilities. Authentic engagement is so important. Why? Because we want to make sure that everyone has a voice and that we're intentional of making sure that we are including all stakeholders. In order for these 4 priorities to be realized, it is important that we have a foundational system of support. So there is a role for every one of our employees to play to ensure that we have 21st century classrooms, our students are leading the way, and that portrait of a graduate is realized.
The past 2 years have been incredibly challenging, but we know that as one community, working towards one goal, that we are up to the task at hand. Every journey begins with one step, and our journey begins today.
So we're in this together. Be committed to the next steps with us. We're going to be committed. We're going to be transparent, but together we can be transformational.
You are far smarter than I was when I was your age, and you will be far smarter than any of us ever will be. And this is because your generation is so innovative, so creative, and you understand your role and your civic duty in making our society better.
Senior to sophomore will definitely benefit you in the future, and I am so happy that you guys chose to take your senior year to packing on with so many college courses. I know it was hard, and you're probably so glad that it's over, but I promise you it was worth it. I was a part of Ohio State's academy, and whenever I had an issue, Miss Raspberry was my first person that I went to.
You know, she is really an amazing person, and she is very passionate about what she does. I couldn't ask for a better support system in this program, and I'm just very thankful for the program and thankful for you too. Thank you.
But most importantly, I now understand that taking a course shouldn't just be about making the A's, but actually learning to love like whatever course you're taking, because that will really pull you through even in the times you don't want to study, or like, I really like this class, so I'm just gonna do it anyways.
I actually found myself becoming really complacent in high school classes. It was really easy, there was no studying, it was just do the work and you get an A. So I'm really grateful for this program to allow me to challenge myself and kind of gain back my drive that I had lost and get me to who I am today.
Exposure changes expectations, but experiences changes lives. We always have to make sure that we give our students more and more experiences, taking them onto college campuses. They can do it. Just listen, we have students that are going to be the next scientists, the doctors, the lawyers. You are the next generation that's going to make America great and greater. It's because of you and your foundations that you have here in Columbus City Schools and at the post-secondary schools that you've attended.
hope that the students feel a sense of accomplishment. I hope they feel proud about what they created. I hope they feel like they, really can do anything.
I want to dance for the rest of my life because I've been doing it up until now, so I still want to do it forever.
You taught me this in Dance 1, that dance is like a universal language.
And over time, I've really realized that my role here has become not necessarily teaching them about the art form of dance, but using dance as a way to understand yourself in the world. And when you understand yourself, then you are able to do more.
So I can say personally, the connection you have with your students and that you want them to do better. You want them to push. You don't want them to fall under any category. You want them to push forward, and her sense of being a community, I'm about to cry. You can really see that. You want to be a community and you push for that. You push for your students so they can have a community. I told you Dance Ensemble is family.
Good evening, everyone. I am calling our January 17th, 2023 regular business meeting of the Columbus Board of Education to order. Please call the roll.
President Adair.
Present.
Ms. Beckerly.
Present.
Mr. Brown. Here. Mr. Cole. I'm here. Dr. Pierce.
I'm here.
Ms. Rez. Here. Vice President Vera. Here. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Will you please stand and join me in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Board members, on our agenda this evening, we do not have any public comment on agenda items. We are expecting a report from our superintendent's office, no report from our internal auditor or treasurer's office. We have a few items in board matters. We have our consent agenda. We have 3 speakers for public comment on non-agenda items, and we have executive session this evening, and then we will adjourn.
Motion to approve the agenda.
There's been a motion and a second. Are there any changes, corrections? Hearing none, and without objection, our agenda has been adopted. We're going to go ahead, go over to Dr. Chapman from the superintendent's office.
Good evening, everyone. President Adair, Vice President Vera, and members of the board. I have a few brief updates to share with the board tonight. First, I'd like to acknowledge School Board Appreciation Month. We are 3 weeks into 2023, and we've really hit the ground running. There's a lot in store for this month, from getting students excited about life after high school to winter graduation. But we want to make sure that we recognize the service of our school board members for your hard work, dedication, and leadership that makes all of this possible. January is School Board Recognition Month, honoring members for their important work in advocating for the best interests of students in the district. Although we are thankful for the work you do year-round, I want to take this time to thank you for your continued dedication and commitment to the district that you display every single day, and looking out for the needs, the interests, and advocating for our students in Columbus City Schools. So, thank you. Global empathy is an important part of what we hope to see our students cultivate and embody, and this week I was able to see that attribute in action. I had the pleasure of joining CCS students, staff, board members, city and community leaders in celebrating the 38th annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. birthday breakfast. This signature event, the largest celebration of its kind, commemorates the life and legacy of Dr. King, a global leader who inspired nonviolent liberation movements worldwide. Each year, student speakers are invited to present tributes during the breakfast. I was honored and privileged to give remarks and introduce 2 CCS students. Northland High School senior Hafsa Musa, and Beechcroft High School senior Joshua Gaucher as they made their MLK Junior oratory debut. I watched in amazement as their poise and leadership skills were displayed, sharing their unique messages about each generation's responsibility and commitment to passing the mantle, carrying on Dr. King's dream. I was also impressed by the outstanding performance of Columbus Afrocentric 11th grader Mackenzie Lewis, who won this year's City of Columbus Oratorical Contest. Mackenzie had the honor of performing her oratorical presentation later that afternoon at the MLK Day program at the Lincoln Theater. Students in the junior ROTC program at South High School were also on hand for the breakfast to present the arms. Attending these events, I'm reminded how CCS students are bringing our Portrait of a Graduate to life with a focus on global empathy. Our students are creating spaces to engage with diverse cultures. They are taking action to make the world better for us all. I also want to recognize CCS staff and alumni who took part in the day's events. Ms. Courtney Noble-Hale, the Director of Total Rewards in our Department of Talent, performed 3 beautiful songs at the breakfast and did an amazing job, as she always does. And Fort Hays Principal Dr. Milton Ruffin and his daughter and CCS alum, Nia Allen, 2 accomplished and nationally recognized musicians, gave a beautiful and moving performance at the afternoon event at the Lincoln Theater. Leaving the day's events, I felt excited, inspired, and appreciative of Dr. King's outstanding achievements. Dr. King's unwavering commitment to the equal rights of others exemplifies his courage, dignity, humility, and service. Thank you to the MLK Breakfast Committee and the MLK Day program organizers for providing the platform for our students to learn, grow, and lead the way. Speaking of continued success, spring is fast approaching, and the district continues to work to get students excited about life after high school. Deadlines are fast approaching, including applying for the FAFSA and the Columbus Promise. To get students excited about their options, there have been many events held throughout this month and last. These What's Poppin' events celebrate the class of 2023 and the second year of the Columbus Promise. I'm looking forward to seeing one of these events for myself later this month at one of our high schools. The Columbus Promise is a promise for a brighter future and an opportunity to change the trajectories of CCS students. This scholarship covers up to 6 semesters of tuition and fees to Columbus State Community College. This really helps set students up for success in their post-secondary journey. Events like these are so important when we talk about focusing on student outcomes and creating opportunities for authentic engagement. Whether students apply to Columbus Promise or choose another path in their journey, it's good to get them to think about their options. Lastly, the Winter Panorama Survey window is quickly approaching in the coming weeks. In continued support of student social-emotional learning, we use Panorama's assessment tools to measure and support student SEL competencies, as well as help create school environments where students thrive. It is vital for students, families, teachers, and staff to share their voice in this ongoing feedback process. We saw significant gains in the response rate this fall, doubling the number of responses we received from school-based staff, departmental staff, and families. The winter survey window opens on Monday, January 30th, and runs through February 17th. Building staff, teachers, and principals will receive an email from Panorama with a link to the survey. Non-school-based staff will take the survey again during the Spring Panorama survey window, which runs April 17th through May 5th. We look forward to capturing the voices of our district community again as we round out the 22-23 school year. Finally, let me share a brief update from our transportation team, and I think the board will be pleased to hear that it is a positive update. Our transportation reliability improvement measures are working. Through the first 8 days of the new routes, the team is happy to report that all of our assigned CCS and charter non-public routes have been covered. That means we have had enough drivers so no routes go uncovered and parents do not have to wonder if a bus will actually show up. I'm told drivers are adjusting to the new routes. The pickup and drop-off times are improving daily, and routes are adjusted based on how many students actually ride the bus each day. At this time, more than 90% of our buses are running on time or only slightly behind. That's also helped rebuild some trust and reliability for our families. The call center remains busy, with more than 1,000 calls a day coming in, and the team continues to work one-on-one with families as they call in. Parents might feel like they are on hold for a long time, but the conversations are important because the routers have been able to make several changes and adjustments because of the concerns raised by parents. And finally, the transportation team continues to focus on recruiting new drivers. A new hiring campaign is underway, which has already produced 21 new potential candidates. A big thank you to Interim Transportation Director Rodney Stufflebean and his team, along with so many other district leaders who've stepped up to make this a true team effort. To show our appreciation for our transportation staff and drivers, our wellness team, alongside senior leadership, passed out winter hats and snacks for our drivers earlier this month. I had the pleasure of visiting the Fort Hays, Moeller, and Freebus bus compounds to meet our drivers, mechanics, routers, dispatchers, call center reps, and administrators who have worked tirelessly to support CCS students and families. This concludes my report, but we will have an additional item for discussion under board matters. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Dr. Chapman? Board Member Beckerly?
I have a few things. I popped into East High School for the What's Popping. It was terrific. And I loved, it was really, they had a DJ, they had the tone, the whole thing was really good. And it was good, as you pointed out, and I picked up on this, to just get kids thinking in general about, seniors. But it was really well done, and I thought this is great for everyone, especially for Promise, but also just for the students in general, and to get them thinking now. So I was really thrilled. The Panorama Survey, this may not help, or maybe it will help. I was happy to hear about the increased participation. If you think there's any possibility that a video from board members or something, we really want to hear from you, this is important to us, anything like that might help convey to our staff that this is really important for us because it's going to help inform our decisions about, culture, climate, how to, achieve the goals and the guardrails. So just a thought, I'd be willing to certainly help, whether it's personal visits, just dropping by in schools or staff meetings, whatever, because it's really important. But I was happy to hear about the increase. I think there was one other thing. Again, happy to hear all the news about the transportation. Just encourage us to come up with some sort of a dashboard thing so we can see the data, because everybody's about transparency, and that's probably the best way to say we're being transparent. But thank you very much.
Other questions for Dr. Chapman? Dr. Pierce.
Thank you, Dr. Chapman, for this report. We appreciate it. What are the patterns of concerns that we're seeing for those 1,000 calls that are coming in?
Thank you, Dr. Pierce, for that question. I will have Rodney come up and speak to that. I believe what the conversations that we've had before, the conversations are more nuanced and based on the individual needs of family members. So it's about the route. But I will ask Rodney to speak to that.
Okay. President Adair, Vice President Vera, members of the board. What we're seeing is majority of them are concerns with stops, distances that we need to walk to the stops. A lot of them in the early stages, we treated this like it was the first day of school. So where's my bus? It's running a little bit behind. Just making sure we have answered as many questions as we can. The naviance to this now is we have the ability to fix those things within a matter of a day or less. As long as we know about what we're asking and what we're being asked, we can address them immediately and usually resolve them within a day or two.
So help me understand. If
Yeah.
you're getting 1,000 calls and they're related to bus stops, are we getting a call or 2 or 3 calls every day from the same parent about the same route? Are we getting it from multiple parents about the route or the stop? That's still a high volume of calls
Right.
that are coming in. So help me understand that pattern. Is it 10 stops that we've identified as dangerous that we need to change or reevaluate?
It's a multitude of a couple different things. Some of them are a couple repeats on occasions when we don't have the information in there for whatever reason for that student, or that student, when the student information came down, there was a flag that was not noticed, so the routing wasn't established for them, so we had to work through the process backwards to find out why they may not have been routed, or they may have had a change that we made manually within Alpha Route to change their location to a stop, and when we got a new list of students, it reverted them back to their old stops and things of that nature. Some of the ones that are repeats are of that nature right there. We had to identify what was causing it to repeat so that we could remove that issue, move it to the correct stop, or make the adjustments as needed. The volume, I guess if I'm looking at it from why the volume is staying as high as it is, we had the extra staff that were on hand for the first 3 days, the 4th, 5th, and 6th, which was fabulous and helped out tremendously. However, some of the questions they were being asked, they were not able to answer, so they referred those to a help ticket that was given to our call center, and then our call center had to progressively go through those. So what it did identify for us in those 2 days are some areas where we're still lacking in the call center. With the added staff not being able to answer it and increase the number of call tickets, therefore they went to the dispatch center, and it just created a backlog over there for the first couple days. So what we're actually looking at is how can we improve the call center service itself with additional staff that's trained to be able to answer any question they may be able to respond to that they receive, and respond correctly and make sure that we're giving proper information. And then the actual phone service itself, we need to really sit back and look at what the capabilities of that service can do for us. As you know, we implemented the new principal hotline because we thought the other one was compromised. May not have necessarily been the case. However, we couldn't identify it. It just moves that call to the front of the queue. We ended up identifying it within the first 3-4 days that even with the new uncompromised number, it was moving it to the front of the queue, but the volume of it, we still weren't able to get to it as fast as we possibly can. So what we are looking at now is a complete different number for that, to where it rings to just a certain individual that would be able to answer it on the line and not be put into a queue.
Last question, just because our board has spent some time talking about bus stops, and we are considering our continuing dialogue around transportation, its necessities, and probably miles and limits and boundaries of that nature. I think it would be very beneficial to know how many of those stops parents have concerns about. If we can identify, it's 15 stops, it's 10 stops. It would also be beneficial to know where those concerns from parents are coming in regard to the walking distance. I know that No Bixby Street continues to be a thorn in our side in terms of just the resources that are needed on that street to provide a safe walking path for our students. So that would just be beneficial and helpful as we continue those conversations.
And I believe we can gather that data based on the call metrics that we keep track of. And that's something that we get through ShareWells and through the calls logs and through other means that we receive information on it for. So it's something that I can definitely look into and come up with.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. All right, we'll go over to our internal auditors. Hello, Auditor Smith.
Hello, Board President Adair, Vice President Vera, and members of the board. I do not have a report this evening,
but I will like to announce that Audit and Accountability will be meeting the last Thursday of the month, this room at 3:30.
All right, thank you. And over to the Treasurer's Office. Hello, Treasurer Bohorik.
Good evening. No report from me this evening. Little qualifier there, I guess.
You have any announcements?
No announcements. We had FAC already, and, well, you'll hear from me about that in another week or so.
All right. Are there any comments from either of the audit chair or finance chairs? All right, thank you all. Let's go ahead and move into board matters. We have item 7.1. We're going to talk about the portrait of a graduate. And just for a note for board members, your slide deck is contained in your binders. They're tabbed. It's one slide deck for both topics, 7.1 and 7.2, just so that you are aware of that. We're going to start with 7.1, portrait of a graduate.
Tonight, you will hear from the team about our portrait of a graduate and how it aligns to the board goals, as well as proposed monitoring calendar for your consideration. We know that board members have had individual conversations with the team regarding the portrait of a graduate and the challenges with the way it was originally defined and anchored to a graduation seal. Tonight, we think it would be beneficial to have a dialogue with the board and, out of necessity, look at the monitoring calendar. Our team has proposed a calendar for the board to adopt tonight to govern our monitoring process and other board pieces tied to student outcomes-focused governance while we redefine what our portrait of a graduate measure will be. With that said, I will now turn it over to Chief of Curriculum and Instruction, Dr. Todd Walker, and Chief of Strategic Performance, Dr. Russ Brown, at this time. Thank you.
Well, good evening, President Adair, Vice President Vera, members of the Board of Education. We are looking forward to an opportunity today to dialogue around portrait of the graduate. That this has been an ongoing conversation, dialogue that we've been having with you since a few months ago in November when we decided that we would change course. So today, as mentioned by Dr. Chapman, we're going to be looking at two things. One is a portrait of a graduate, and then the calendar. I will be walking us through a dialogue around portrait of the graduate, and then I'll be turning it over to Dr. Brown to talk with you about calendar adjustments. So in December, I sent you a memo, and so these are just some of the high points from that as we enter into a dialogue today around portrait of the graduate. And from a historical perspective, and this is a public meeting, so it may be helpful for those who are not as familiar with the process. In December 2019, our Board of Education, along with the administration, engaged in a process that involved Battelle for Kids, the administration, and the community around developing 21st century attributes around the concept of portrait for a graduate. Initially, in 2021, the Board of Education and Administration prioritized POG, developed a goal and metrics around a graduation seal, as well as interim measures at the 5th, 8th, and 10th grade designed to assess progress towards portrait of a graduate. The current portrait of the graduate goal is that the percentage of the class of 2028 who earn a portrait of graduate seal will increase from 0% in June 2022 to 25% by June 2028. During a period of reassessment, we discovered that the portrait of the graduate seal is no longer an option based upon the state of Ohio's new guidance around seals, and that there are 9 state seals and 3 local seals that are predefined for the class of 2023 and beyond. And the board had a desire to distinguish POG from its graduation goal. Therefore, in November 2022, the board administration determined that it would be necessary to have a POG reset. One of the things that we decided to do was to have dialogue with each of the board members individually. We met with a few of you in small groups so that we could have an understanding of how you were thinking about PLG in the initial stages and capturing the ideas that board members had as we thought about how best to move forward. Board member feedback fell specifically into two categories. One, it was the idea of a community report card. So PLG is a means of showcasing to our community, to employers, to institutions, what our students, that our students are ready for what's next. And so an alternative to our state report card that we had. The other feedback that came out from those conversations was that PLG more is an idea of 21st deeper learning, which combines content typical, your science, your English, your math, your social studies, with the portrait of the graduate attributes, communication, adaptability, global empathy, combining to an idea of deeper learning where students are involved in curriculum, they're involved in symposiums, they have project-based learning that demonstrates PLG. So in thinking about a recalibration, the administration is currently redefining PLG, and this emerging revision of PLG falls basically within two categories. And we see these as two sides of the same coin, or of a coin. One of the ways that is easiest to analogize this is that when we look at how we typically think about student achievement, you have student achievement outcomes, but then you have inputs of teacher pedagogy, of teacher instruction that goes into it. Those are both things that are important, but they're measured in different ways. One, the student achievement outcomes are an output, whereas the teacher pedagogy, the instruction that goes in, is an input. As it relates to PLG, the one concept of PLG is thinking about it as a community report card is really more of an output. It's measured by indicators of post-secondary readiness as a way that we could think about it, captured through CTE, through AP, through STEAM, creative ways that we could think about that, quantitatively measure what we think happens when a student is demonstrating PLG. As an input, PLG would be more of a guardrail, or PLG could be considered as captured within the strategic priorities that we have, as measured by exhibitions of deeper learning, curriculum, implementation, or student symposiums. So there's multiple ways that we could think about the input. One way might be as a board guardrail. Another way might be as fitting within our strategic priorities that we already have. So as a way of just framing sort of where we are and what we're thinking about and the purpose of our conversation today, in January, which is our meeting that we're having now, this is an opportunity for us to have a corporate public conversation and dialogue around the outcomes and what we heard from you and sort of the general direction that we think we might go with PLG. In March, we would present a revised PLG plan and have an opportunity for, again, individual feedback or small group feedback with you. In April, the plan is that we will submit a written draft, and that will be a final PLG plan. And then in June or May, we would have an administration-led presentation on that final plan. So our goal for the dialogue today is that we want to create some shared meeting around the appreciation of each individual and the team's insight. So that's each Board of Education member and administration. We're not looking to make a decision tonight, but we would like to gain some insight from you all as a collective, because we believe that we can hear each other, that we can learn from each other. And what this will do is provide myself and my team, Dr. Brown and his team, an opportunity when we're going back and refining the concepts that we currently have to ensure that we are in alignment and integrating both the community's perspective and the Board of Education's perspective as it relates to Portrait of a Graduate. And so by way of having this conversation, what we would like to do is hear a response in two ways. One is that, and you could answer one or both of these questions, what takeaways, reflections, or insights would you offer? As a second question, we'd be interested in hearing from you. Where would you appreciate clarification, more information, or need to explore meaning? That provides a helpful way for us as we're moving forward to both capture your ideas and then be able to curate them as we're working to shape POG moving forward. So President Adair, as a dialogue, if you would be open to it, I know you normally go last, but if we could start with Ramona Reyes and go clockwise, so we would go to Board Member Reyes, Board Member Cole, Board Member Beckerly, and we come back around to Board Member Brown. That way we have a chance to hear from each of you, and then we would conclude with you.
That's fine. You just want to make sure everyone gets an opportunity.
Yeah,
That's one way to go about it.
That's fine. We can go around that way.
Thank you.
We'll start with Board Member Cole because he actually had his hand up first.
Okay.
Because I was already taking hands. So we'll start that way and then we'll go back really next.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you so much for this presentation thus far and this opportunity. As I think about Portrait of a Graduate, what I like what I see right now in terms of what you were listening to and the salience you got from us regarding, readiness for post-secondary and career readiness for our students. What I am not clear on and what I need meaning and metric around would be the elementary and middle school grade bands. What is Portrait of a Graduate going to mean in those spaces? Initially, it did have meaning in those spaces to highlight student academic achievement around specific areas that we highlighted as SEALs. So where are we with those grade bands, I think is an important piece for me. I might have another one as we move forward that maybe somebody might not have covered, but immediately that's what I see is some area of clarity around meaning and metrics.
Member Beckerly.
I just wanted to say I really like the timetable. I think it's aggressive but reasonable, and it reflects that this is important, but it's enough time to get it done, and it's thoughtful. So I appreciate that. All right, I'm looking to where I was. When you talked about, on your board feedback, you had 2 points, and then you had in parentheses a community report card. I like that idea, but I think of it a little bit more like, and this is not my idea, this is Dr. Brown's idea. Our graduates come with their diploma, whatever the state report card says, plus something else. It's like, what's the thing that CCS grads have that everybody else doesn't have, because we're really intentional about the portrait. So as much as I understand where you were coming from with the community report cards, it's a reflection of, because the portrait is the reflection of the values that the community came up with. I see that the POG, what we bring to the table or what our grads will bring to the table, having benefited from POG, is that they've got these extra skills because we were intentional about them. They've got the 21st century skills. So I think that when we think about that item 1, what we're doing is delivering the extra, the intentionality of focusing on that. So it's just a slightly different way that I would frame it with the way I think about it. And I very much like the idea of the guardrail addressing the inputs. And, in terms of our SOFG structure, we're allowed to have another guardrail because 5 is the recommended max and we only have 4, so we've got some room there. And what I think about it, to Board Member Cole's point, is that's where I think we get in the lower grades, because it seems to me if we're serious about addressing adjusting inputs so that we're embedding the portrait traits in our students, the guardrails are going to look something like, by 2026, X% of our second graders will have participated in experiential learning or practice-based learning, or demonstrating global awareness, or however that guardrail is going to be written, or those guardrails are written, are the metrics for the guardrail. I think that's where we can take it back through you know, maybe a second, there'll be certain touch points in terms of grade level, so that you can say by fourth grade, maybe it happens in third grade, maybe it happens in fourth grade, but by fourth grade, the end of fourth grade, X percentage of our students will have, I'm making stuff up here, but global empathy, pen pals in other countries. Just, that's way too specific, but just the idea of what's appropriate for a fourth grader to be experiencing adult inputs that embed global empathy. So I think those are my, yeah, that's it. But I overall, I'm really happy that we're on this path because I think it's where we need to be.
Ramona, are you ready?
Not yet. Still thinking.
Board Member Brown, are you ready?
Sure, why not? I do like the work that's going forward on this. I do think that it is a good time to review and reflect and move this forward. As I see it, there are at least two aspects to this. One is what are we actually doing with our students? What are they learning? How will they demonstrate that? And substantively, how are we improving and benefiting our students? The second piece is how do we display that to the rest of the world, whether that's workforce or parents or any of the communities that they circulate in. And I'm not sure that we have yet paid enough attention to that second category. I think we actually need somebody to take a look at this from the perspective of a marketing expert. What terminology do we use as a student might describe this to their parents as what they've achieved? What language is used to describe it to employers? As it is, I'm not sure that that comes very easily. But I think we need to really clarify it and use some common terms that are not jargon and not acronyms to explain it to, you know, prospective employers, to colleges, to the rest of the world.
Dr. Pierce?
Thank you for the presentation. So I think what I would appreciate clarification on is how we can take the elements of a portrait of a graduate and embed those elements in our goals and in our curriculum, lesson plans, experiences on a regular basis. So I would appreciate us flipping this as opposed to looking at it as a goal per se or a seal. But this should really be about, it should be how we talk about what our students have learned and gained, that they are critical thinkers, that they are adaptive, that they have communication skills. And then we as educators, as a board, as a district, should be able to pull examples from any grade level to show that these skills have been achieved, as opposed to chasing the creation of a seal. So I would appreciate that, a reframing, a reimagining, a rethinking. The portrait of a graduate, in my mind, provides us with a blueprint, a foundation through which we share with the community, with future employers, with military officials, how our students are prepared and ready.
Board Member Reyes.
So I guess, thank you for the presentation first. I was just trying to gather my thoughts, and I think I'm going back to the conversation when we had our one-on-ones, when I talked about individual students and learning paths. A couple years ago, we went to I believe it was the Council of Great City Schools, and there was, kind of touches a little bit of what Dr. Pierce was saying, is there was a individual manual as to what each child at each level was going to start learning and what they would end up with at kindergarten, at first grade. So this is what we're going to learn, and this is what they should learn by this level. And it was clearly explained to the kindergartner as well as to the parent, and kind of back to what Board Member Brown was saying, and to the community. So there was clear expectations on each side. A lot of times we talk globally, we talk by class size, we talk about cohort, we talk about east side, west side, north side, south side. At some point, when we're looking at this, how do we look at it? How do we look at it at an individual student level and be able to communicate that up because of the diversity of our district, right? We always talk about, well, what are the whatever demographic we want to say, kind of like an IEP, but it's an individual study plan for each of our students, and what is that learning path for that student. And if we keep that in mind, then maybe when the data comes, as we're analyzing it, it's more direct to each of our students, because we say each student will be educated, right? And then it'll be more direct as we see the data, because we could do anything and everything for analyze the data, but if it's not helping each student, then how do we get to each student when we're evaluating what you bring back?
Vice President?
Thank you. So what I really appreciate about this process, or us having the opportunity to have this conversation, is really also considering who still is not at the table. And I think a big part, even looking at your time frame and process here, you know, I don't hear that our kids are at the table. And so that's something that I think is extremely important, making sure that we are going into our buildings, talking to elementary school age kids, middle school age kids, high school age kids, and asking them, what does POG mean to them? Because I believe the kids will tell us what they need and what they need to be able to not only understand it, but own it and be a part of the creation. As Dr. Pierce mentioned, I think it's important that we are not just necessarily creating another initiative, but really putting these attributes as part of our everyday process, as part of our everyday curriculum learning and opportunities and partnerships. Because what I think about also, as we talk about a lot of this being tied to academic achievement, I think about kids who, even though they try their hardest, they may not ever make honor roll. And so I think about our kids who need additional support, whether it's our special education or ELL. And so I also want to think about, how are we framing this so that all of our kids have the opportunity to experience and create these credentials or these additional pathways for themselves without being limited based on, academic achievement. So that's something I wanted to highlight, because oftentimes I think that becomes, a stressor for young people. I was never, super honor roll kid, but I still tried hard. And so looking at ways that we can capture these different opportunities for our kids, but also looking at the whole child. And I know that is a priority to us. One of the other things that I also wanted to, and I think we talked about this, Dr. Brown and Dr. Walker, during our time, but really helping a way that we can demonstrate our kids' achievements, whether it be through, I think I mentioned to you, how we utilize tools like Infinite Campus. If they are receiving their, critical thinking or global empathy, how is that on a transcript? If it's not a seal, can it be on a transcript? And can it be as early, as kindergarten or elementary, to where parents can go to the portal and they can print out, my kid has all of these different attributes, this is what they're earning. Because I think we have to also look at what tools do we already have readily available that we can utilize these opportunities that are easily accessible to tools that parents are already familiar with. And so I think that's really important, just to look at our technology, how it relates to how we want to roll this out, and how do we utilize tools of communication so that our families also understand what POG is, how does this really apply to their kids? What can they do to help their kids with POG? And then ultimately the larger conversation as to how do we get our kids to see the value in striving to receive these accolades. So that's all I have initially.
So for me, I think that the POG is definitely more of a guardrail, because it's something our community told us that we need to do. And I think for clarification or more information that I need is to understand where you are as the administration with it today. Because when we created this before the pandemic, we might be in a different place or need to be in a different place. We saw presentations back to Board Member Cole's points about this is what they're going to do in third grade, and this is what we hope to get by. Is that all still? Are we still doing that? Is that getting us to where we need to go? And that kind of gets back to what some of my colleagues have said about ensuring that we have all the voices in the mix to ensure that that's still where we want to go, because this is a community vision. So for me, it's figuring out when we have these attributes, that's what our community wants. What does it look like? And then comes the question, how does the board then measure and hold it accountable? Right? And, I think my colleagues had a lot of great points on that. I do look at it kind of like Dr. Pierce is kind of like when we talk about equity, right? It just has to become part of our conversation. And so I don't know if it should be a goal or a guardrail, or I don't really know yet what it is that we need to measure. I just know that, we promised our community that we would accomplish these things. But I also want to make sure that we stay relevant, and we are adaptable ourselves. And, we are using our space and time to push where we need to go in this moment for our students. So not being tied to, those plans and strategies. But I'm not sure we are a level set on what we're doing today, because we haven't really seen it again in whole about where you're going. And, in terms of other voices, I think, I don't know, Battelle, did a lot of work with us in terms of creation. Are they helping us with implementation? Are they helping us, with some of the things about communication forward? And I think you got the community report card maybe from me. I know I talked about that. And it really is about, because these are our community's desired attributes, and we know that some of our measurement tools, while are important, they are full of bias themselves. And so when our students can, meet those standards, and we have this extra standard that our community has set, we know that we are producing students that this community knows are going to be ready to do whatever it is that we want them to do. And so I think that that's really important. But, I'm not sure I can talk about exactly what we're measuring until I know what we're doing. I know that we have to hold the district accountable, because that's what our community has asked us to do. And maybe we just need to kind of take another step back. I like, the timeline, but even maybe a little bit, one more step back and get some more of that feedback to make sure we're in the right spot at the right time. Board Member Cole.
Thank you so much, Madam President. If I may, I'd just like to throw a couple of thoughts out. First and foremost, I always start with appreciative inquiry. I'm looking at your data availability page, as I did earlier today. I think that this is a unique opportunity. When we hear Madam President talk about guardrail, I think this is really the interim guardrail space. When you're looking at this data specifically here as your kind of standard. I love how on the previous slide you have these kind of chalking standards, that geographic shape that's kind of looking like it's chalking the wheels. I think that this data availability piece, where you're looking at in-class curriculum assisted stuff like iReady, where you're constantly looking at where students are in terms of their literacy and understanding, mastery around that. When you're looking at credit attainment, that could easily that starts in middle school. There's an opportunity to look at how that starts in middle school. So I see some things here that from an interim guardrail perspective, where we're looking for those kind of interim metrics, I think that these things play a vital role. I see what you're trying to do. The ultimate issue with POG, period, it's a national model. I think what we're in the process of doing is really trying to modify it for us specifically and how it makes sense to our environment from the state regulated standpoint of defined seals. I think if you're talking about global empathy, and I'm just making an arbitrary, example, but if you're talking about global empathy, maybe there's a pathway opportunity in social studies, in history, on the middle school level that gives a student all the way through high school, that gives a student the opportunity, and maybe even the grade opportunity, because you don't get a seal by the state unless you got that B or higher. You got to get a B or higher to get the citizenship seal, to get the science seal, so on and so forth. I think that if we're embedding, as everybody has said, that standard early on and trying to work them towards that progressively, maybe that's how we tie this hard data piece into the curriculum, into behavior, into all of these things that we're trying to do, even down to culture and climate. I hope I'm making sense, but I'm looking at the data availability piece, and I see where it's connecting with opportunity on the earlier grade band, but I think that there's some more work that we could figure out on how to do that.
Board Member Beckerly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Beckerly.
I think that a lot of the thoughts that have come up could be integrated into guardrails. And I can see the guardrail really being the vehicle, because the guardrails are in the negative, right? So it would be sort of no child shall graduate without having experienced X, Y, and Z, and in this case, and they would be POG aligned instruction experiences, activities. It's a heavy lift. We're asking you guys to basically kind of come up with a whole structure of, almost a curriculum sort of thing, or a not curriculum, instructional practices that are going to be different. And then we're saying we want, and so it's almost like you have certain gates you have to get through in order to be a graduate with graduate portrait ready, so to speak. And those gates strike me as guardrails, and they can be really specific to a lot of the things that everyone at the table mentioned, or they can integrate them somehow. And so I really, the more I hear everybody speaking, the more I think even to Board Member Brown's point about how do you market it, well, we have, our students are doing these things, and this is how the board knows they're doing them, because we're measuring it at, and I'm making 4th grade, 8th grade, 10th grade, whatever. So I do see that we're closer in that sense, I think, than we might realize we are, because we don't have the specifics yet, but conceptually, I think we're pretty close. To Vice President Vera's point, I think that part of what needs to be in the parentheses under the recalibration item, where it says measured by indicator, POG as an output measured by indicators, and you have CTE, AB, AP, IB, STEAM pathways. I almost think to address that point, Board Member, or Vice President Vera, which is that this is all sort of measuring certain academic outcomes. If we focused on the need for post-secondary remediation as in terms of it going down, because that would apply to all of our students, whatever their pathway is. And so it would be everyone, not just college-bound, or not just, and remediation could be measured by, a student who's trying to get into construction trades and needed to take some extra math because he or she wasn't ready to do math that's required for carpentry or something. Or remediation you know, we have some really great programs in special ed where we're training kids for life skills and career tech. You know, so those students graduate ready for the next phase as opposed to having to take some more programming after they graduate. So we could come up with a metric, I think, that basically measures every student based on their own individual pathway and whether they were able to pursue it or they needed remediation until they could pursue it. Now, that might be really complicated. Dr. Brown's looking at me like, you know, is she kidding? But that might be a way to make sure it's accessible. We can say, yes, all of our students are portrait ready. So it's just a thought.
Vice President Vera.
And just to add, just as a follow-up, I do believe, you know, every building is unique. And, you know, just in going into many of our buildings, you know, spending time with the teachers, they give you a really clear indication as to what's going to work in their building. And so I think it's also, you know, I hear a lot about kind of like the marketing. I don't think we will have to pitch this if it's just done with student voice. So I think it's priority for us. You know, me personally, am not as concerned about the marketing. If it's student-led, student-driven, if the teachers are able to give honest input as to what's going to work in their building, we will see success. And then ultimately employers, partners, they're going to hear about it and they're going to want to be involved. So I think it's more of spending time in each region, each building with whether it's student ambassadors or, you know, just and a mixture, not just the student ambassadors, right? It needs to be a combination of different students, different teachers. If we can really capture the voice in our buildings, I don't think it's a hard lift if we just listen to what works in those spaces and then take all that information and then allow you the opportunity to figure out how you want to separate it. But I think our buildings, our teachers, our kids, they will tell us what works for them because this is a very different generation of learners. And I think that's the biggest lift, if anything, is public education catching up with the fact that this is a new generation. What worked before for me, with my mom, my grandmother, is not what's working for the kids of 2023, the kids of Columbus. So I think we have to be okay with stepping outside of what's historically been done or what we are comfortable with, because that's truly not the kids that we are serving. So when I go into buildings, they tell me all the time. When we were at the dinner the other night, I met a high school student at the CEA dinner, MLK dinner. I had the young gentleman from Walnut Ridge, Deshaun. He told me exactly what Walnut Ridge needed in the 15 minutes that I got to sit with him. So I just constantly say that because I think that we have such unique opportunity, and our kids, they're bright. Our team, they're bright. And so just what can we do just to create more opportunities to listen directly from them?
And I think that what Board Member Rivera just said is really important, and then it kind of brings back something I think it was Dr. Pierce brought up. You know, really this idea of portrait, and I think you guys said it too, should it be more of a strategic priority? Because portrait should really be part of all the rest of the goals. Like, I also don't want us to go create a whole side set of goals for portrait when truly we need to see portrait in our reading goals. We need to see portrait, you know, in our graduation goals. We need to see it in things that we're already working on. And maybe, I think, Dr. Pierce, I think you said that, you know, maybe that's a better way to do the alignment once we have, you know, it as a guardrail, being able to kind of see it in this way. And then that gives more opportunity for it to be embedded, to draw into each school, each child, and allow those voices to come in. Member Beckerly?
Oh, never mind.
Okay. Well, I think this was just the start of this, obviously. Did you feel like you got things that you needed?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for just the opportunity to hear you all's feedback. I also think it was helpful for you all to hear each other's feedback because I heard sort of an evolution of even how you all were thinking about it, and that's helpful for us as we're going back. And so this is a first step. We have as a second step that we're going to come back in March in some small groups. And so we'll debrief certainly after this with Dr. Chapman and the rest of the team. And if that seems to still make sense, then we'll use that as a next step. And then we can reassess where we are at that point, I think, and say, we certainly have some ideas, and I think you all have given us some helpful feedback that will help us to go back with the team and figure out the best path forward. We'll have sort of a working draft, is my thought, in March, and that gives us an opportunity to have some additional feedback.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. Thank you, board members, for your feedback as well. Now we're going to transition to our conversation about the calendar. And I just want to remind you that you should have a copy. You do have a copy of the calendar in your binder, a hard copy, and you also have an electronic copy of the calendar. So we're transitioning to the second part of our conversation at this time. And welcome, Dr. Brown.
Good evening. So thank you again for having that dialogue with us. It was, I think, a great opportunity for us to hear from you collectively and continue to inform how we think about this as we move forward. Obviously, with this shift and rethinking the portrait, we had to look at the calendar. And board member Becker Lee's been pushing, saying, hey, we need to have this calendar in place to govern what we're doing for, in this in-between. That being said, what's being proposed today is an iteration of that, because there are lots of placeholders out there. And so we have to think about where all this fits together over time. And I'm going to lean into that a little bit as we talk about it. So today, again, the objective here is to talk about the when. And really, I'm focusing on what we're doing between now and June. Primarily. We've carried it forward on the next couple of years, but obviously we're going to have to come back to this calendar and look at it again as we define whether or not we're doing a guardrail or a different form of goal. We're going to have to revisit this calendar by necessity. And I think that's, again, just a reflection of that learning process that we've all been engaged in, that as we learn and as we reflect on things, we try to improve. That being said, I think there is an opportunity to improve the calendar right now. There are some things that we can do that I think align to things that I've heard over the board over time. And so we're presenting a calendar today. Again, it's an iteration that's proposed for adoption. And again, I would expect that we will revisit this as we move forward. So thank you, Board Member Cole, for leaning in and talking about data availability. Because ultimately, data availability does drive a lot of what goes on with this calendar. And obviously, it's connected to the calendar year. Most of our data comes available at the semester, shortly after the semester, and at the end of the year. So those are two sort of windows of time during the year where we have a lot of information all at once, and then we have windows of time where we don't have as much summative information. So when looking at the calendar, with that in mind, there were some things that I tried to use to prioritize the shaping of a calendar. One, with our sort of historical background, tried to maintain at least one monitoring session per month in the calendar as we move forward. The second was, and this was in response to things I've heard from board members over time, tried to move those interim goals that are closer to our outcome. So when I'm thinking about 11th grade on track for graduation, let's move that back and let's look at that earlier so we have a little bit more time to adapt and do something different. When we're looking at second grade reading, again, we're getting closer to third grade. Let's look at that earlier, and if we have to adapt and do something, let's look at that earlier. So we did switch things around a little bit to accommodate that. And then finally, because data comes at certain windows of time, if we're not careful, that data can lag. We can be looking at it quite a ways after. So I've tried wherever possible to minimize the amount of time between when the data becomes available and when we'd be looking at it publicly. So those were the drivers. And so again, following the end of the first semester, we have our iReady data for growth. That's our first time in the year when we can actually look at that data. And that becomes a driver for our interim goals tied to reading in third grade. And then finally, same thing with credit attainment. We see credit attainment at the end of the semester, and that helps us understand our on-track rates for graduation and whether or not our cohorts are moving through that cycle the way that we intend. At the end of the year, we get our OST results. So in the early fall, it makes a lot of sense to look at, hey, where did we end with third grade reading? Are we where we're supposed to be? Same thing, August graduation, so in September we can come back and say, hey, preliminarily this is where we think we're going to land with the grad rate. And that's fairly close, again, to when the data is available. We're trying to keep that fairly tight. Likewise, with our climate data, MTSS, and our tiered fidelity inventory data, all that comes at the end of the year. So again, looking at when would it make sense to be able to talk about that without a lot of lag in between. And meanwhile, let's try to hold some space for where we might have interims connected to the portrait of the grad. And most of those are around the middle part of the year between November and January. So I really tried to space this out to hold this. So again, when you take those sort of priorities and you look at the calendar, we move the 11th grade to February, 11th grade on track to February. That gives us a little bit longer on-ramp to do something about it, to get kids on track. 9th and 10th grade were moved to April because, again, they have a little bit longer on-ramp before they graduate. So we have a little bit more time to work with those students. We want to prioritize the 11th graders because we're down to about a year and a half with them at that point. Early literacy, again, we moved that. 2nd grade got moved back to March. Again, we prioritized graduation, so we moved graduation ahead of early literacy, but we moved the early literacy forward only about a month in this proposed calendar. Kindergarten and 1st grade moved to May. Again, they have a little bit longer on-ramp to adapt to that. The guardrails were moved to August from January. Again, it's based on data availability, and it reduces the lag on that. And also, again, creates that space that we'll need when we want to talk about interims for Portrait of the Grad. So this is the proposed calendar through the remainder of this year. It incorporates what Dr. Walker talked about in terms of coming back to the board. I put in here June for revisiting the final for that, but it could be May as well, depending. But you'll see, we had the portrait dialogue today. February, we come back, talk about on track for 11th grade. March, we come back, 2nd grade reading, and on throughout this calendar. Again, we've shuffled it around to try to follow those priorities that I discussed. Again, this right now is a placeholder. It is an iteration of this calendar for us. We will, by necessity, as we revisit portrait and rethink it, we're going to have to think about how these could be moved around. But this is meant to at least get us through the end of the year so that we have a common set of expectations about what's coming to the board between now and June.
Cole?
Thank you. Thank you for this proposed calendar. Help me just put it into perspective. Maybe I'm thinking a little too granular. I realize that this is a calendar that's really based on board monitoring. It's based on us having the opportunity to observe student phenomenon in a given time. Gotcha. What does that mean, though, on a more school building level when we're talking about children that need to be in a position to remediate, to pivot, to improve their situation? Are we getting this information too late? Or how does this translate to how buildings will operate in terms of student achievement and remediation if that has to happen?
So 2 points on that. One, this past year, we made sure to work with our transformation leadership team to ensure that our school improvement plans are aligned to the board goals and guardrails. So our teams at our schools are actively looking at this data and monitoring progress of students because their goals for their building are aligned to this. We're about ready to have a data experience where we'll bring all our schools back together to reflect on growth to this point in time. And it's an opportunity for the teams then to reflect on, hey, speaking of the illustration you mentioned earlier, things that are working and that continuous improvement, well, we want to consolidate those. Things that are working, we want to learn from those. We want to consolidate those practices. We want to deepen that over time. If, on the other hand, we've been working along and we're not seeing the scores going the direction we want, well, it's a time for the team to reflect, and they still have time before the end of the year to adapt and change their practice. And that's how we're, at this point, working this down through to the schools. That's part one. Part two, with respect specifically to iReady, our students are, as they test and are placed through iReady, then there are expectations for them in terms of remediation if they're scoring below grade level. Those expectations are differentiated based, Dr. Walker's team put together a nice thing on that, are differentiated based on student need. The further you're behind, the more intervention it's going to take to get you up to grade level. So we're actively leaning into that very quickly with kids. Again, when we get to that mid-year point where we can monitor growth, that gives us that chance to pivot and retool if we need to.
Okay, thank you.
We have Beckerly, Reyes, Vera, Pierce. Remember Beckerly.
This is great, thank you. A couple of things. One, this is nit, but I think the board self-evaluation should be moved to 1 month later because we're supposed to be evaluating on the previous 3 months. So if it's a quarterly evaluation, we just want to bump those down maybe. And the only other thought I have is that I'm a little concerned about the guardrails, having enough time to evaluate them, and we might want to, and maybe we can just figure it out after we do some of the monitoring in June. Do we need to spread them out as we start looking at the data and the discussions we're having? So I think that we may be doubling up at certain points, and that's okay. I think that there's 2 meetings a month, and if 1 month is a guardrail and 1 month is a goal, that's okay if that's what's needed for us to really analyze how we're doing on the guardrails. So that's my only other observation. But I think as far as this goes, we're in good shape. And yes, it's iterative. And the one other sort of thought I suppose I have is that what we should have is one monitoring calendar that's in force at any given time, and then if we need to adjust it, then we have a new one. So adjusting it isn't the problem, it's just they can't be fluid in between. So I think that's just for clarity. But thank you, I really am excited about this. I think there's a lot of thought that went into it, and it's really well structured.
Remember Reyes.
Thank you. I do appreciate the movement of the dates. I think it's very difficult, even from prior years, when we get the data late, even though we're not the ones doing the intervention, right? It's you all. But acknowledging that 9th, 10th grade, and then kindergarten, these are April and May deadlines. That's also very close to the end of the year. So the difficulty I've had in the past is getting those and understanding how do you, because that cohort, that child has already moved on. So if we didn't do right by them at first grade, getting a number that is low for a certain cohort that may have to stay behind. What are going to be what's going to be our intervention or our question, right? Because at that point, the child is either going to stay behind a grade and or the child is deficient in some way, not making it to the next grade, whether it's second grade or at this point 10th or 11th grade. First, second, or 10th or 11th grade. So I'm just wondering, and it doesn't have to be answered today, when we get data so late, what will be the work, or what will we be analyzing as a board? What are those proficiencies or things that didn't work? What is that going to look like when you come back with the report? Because we're going to be looking, and it's always the hard part, right? We're always looking at old data in school districts, which is horrible. So I would be interested in how, as we go through this, when you find the deficiency, let me give you an example. Maybe that's a better way. So when we found that when we were not going to get the grade that we wanted in our third year of failing, one of the remediations that we found right away was going out and talking to each of our seniors and getting them and pushing them to the finish line. It was a certain number of people that we needed to do, and that actually moved us a whole letter grade. That took a period of about 45 to 60 days. If we would have known that earlier, could we have done that remediation earlier? Because the way that the board was involved is we were asked to call, we were involved. There was a whole community effort in helping our students. So as you think about these dates, as we solidify this in the future, if we plan on doing an intervention like that, where it's all hands on deck, it was everybody. It was board members calling, those of you who were here, we were calling. We had community members calling. We were reaching out to the seniors, what do you need to get that grade up? That could have been done probably earlier had we had the data. So just as we think about these dates and the information, that would be helpful. So thank you.
I just want to comment on that. So I think that that's the whole point of this model, is to not be in that situation. So as we work through the model year after year and the children matriculate through year after year, we are catching them earlier within their reading, within their math, before they hit graduation, because we know that that's where the barriers are. And so, that's the design of it. So while it's, hard up front right now because we're just getting started, the goal will be that it gets easier over time. And we are watching those cohorts as they move through. And then their, interventions occur all the way at the beginning, right? And so we aren't doing that last minute, because the thing is, we know, because we're using leading indicators, not old data. And so it's a different way of thinking about the data. So we're in the process of shifting it, right? And so, that's why we're talking about old data right now, because we're shifting it, but that's the goal of the whole model, is to get to this where we're looking at it so our children are not in that situation.
Right. So I'm just saying that as they look at it, what they may want to come back and switch the dates.
Yeah.
Madam President, if I could just make a recommendation to, when you're talking about graduation, we always typically look at, of course, high school graduation. But I think that if we're really trying to be intentional about monitoring progress and designing strategy around that, we need to incorporate 6th grade and 8th grade. We need to start looking that early back to be able to see where the trend is. I'll make a quick example. I went to school with a kid that got passed through school, and he was functionally illiterate. He couldn't read. He'd come to my house, me and my mother, sit down with him and read with him. But he got passed along. He was in school practically every day, but he got passed along. I think this is how we capture. This is just one of those ways in which we begin to capture and design a mindset that says that we're not going to let a kid pass, because we're monitoring that kind of progress in those kind of very structured ways. So maybe we're looking again at 6th grade as well as 8th grade. I think kids need to be, because the state, and I'll say this in closing, because the state looks at a graduation cohort, not as a class, not as the class of 2022. The class of 2022 started 4 years ago as freshmen. And everybody that's matriculated from 9th grade through 12th is then considered the class. Well, I want to make sure that our 6th graders are designed and developed into being 9th grade prepared, and so on and so forth. So we have to start looking early.
I'm going to go Vera, Pierce, and then back to Beckerly.
Thank you. And so just to echo what Board Member Cole mentioned earlier, I too just have concerns. I would imagine there is conversation internally prior to the point in the calendar when we're actually getting the data. But I think what concerns me most is the May kindergarten and 1st grade reading interim goals, just because, that is the tail end of the school year. And so one of my questions in terms of, does this data drive our staffing and resource needs for each building? Is my first question. Do these reports, everything we kind of come together, does this drive staffing and resource needs per building?
No, not at this time.
Should it?
So just want to back up a couple of steps. We're, the board goals, the 3 board goals that the board has identified, these are the metrics, the interim goals and the board goals that you have said we need to monitor these at the board table. And so the calendar that we're presenting is really just an attempt for us to map out when we have that conversation.
Right.
Remembering that the goal of the goals is for us to meet the board goals. When we think about graduation, yes, we want to, make sure that we're on track to meet that goal, so we have the interim goals. When we have that conversation at the board table, that's what we're discussing tonight. I just want to remind everyone that our teachers have data about their students. They're constantly looking at who's on track, who's off track. At the elementary level, we have formal processes for memorializing that. For example, with literacy, students who are off track, they're immediately placed on a RIMP, and teachers are monitoring those plans formally, and that's a requirement from ODE. In addition to that, all of our teachers are monitoring their students, their progress. Our principals have internal processes with their BLT and their TBTs for when they look at data. Certainly for the larger assessments, that data comes in at three times a year, right? And so beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year, and that's when we are plugging in. When that data comes in, that's when we're monitoring at the board table. But I don't want you to think at any point during the school year that the data, we're only looking at the data when we are looking at this particular monitoring calendar. This is just for our conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I understood.
Okay.
And I understand that too.
Yes, but so to your question about resources, so for example, we are in the process of moving towards an equity-based staffing model, right? So that's that is a board guardrail, and so we are partnering with an organization to help us move in that direction. A component of that, you mentioned like our student achievement data and how we're looking at literacy, math data. At present, no, we are not considering student achievement data as we're looking at staffing, how we staff a building, coming up on Article 211. No, that's not a part of our current process, but we are moving in a direction, again, as a part of one of our guardrails, to have a more comprehensive staffing model that includes components of equity.
Thank you. I know the treasurer's glad to hear that too.
Yes, but I just wanted, sorry, I just had to share that I didn't, on behalf of all of our teachers and our school leaders who are looking at data every day. If you go in their buildings, they have data walls, they have data notebooks, they're having conversations with students about how the students are measuring their growth on iReady and reading and math. So they're being very creative of how they create an ongoing conversation and dialogue with the students, with the staff, with families to measure and monitor progress. So just want to make sure everyone knows that it's ongoing conversations at multiple levels, but for now we're just focusing on our monitoring calendar that we discussed with the board.
No, I appreciate that because I think it goes back to just, the larger conversations that we're constantly having. Like, we may not get this data. So for our FYI, I won't see this until later on in the year if I use the kindergarten, first grade reading. But when we look at legislation as it relates to things that are requested, these are things that we don't necessarily have access to until these periods of time. And I'm sure we could send an email, but it's more of just thinking about, as we're moving to the staffing model, but even how we approve legislation, how we look at, budgets, and how we look at even the larger conversation of FMP, the programs that need to be a part of these buildings. will be driven in part by the data that we're seeing from these monitoring reports. So it's just kind of getting a better understanding of how this is all interconnected in that way.
Dr. Pierce.
I really appreciate this conversation, the fact that we're so focused on data and measuring growth. And so in alignment with Board Member Coles, Reyes's question and Dr. Chapman's comment just now around data and how we're collecting that, help me understand how we can incorporate end-of-the-year assessments into this monitoring and data collection so parents and students are actually able to see their growth when they're using iReady beyond mid-year points.
So we use iReady. The purpose of iReady is to help us monitor our students' growth and specifically growth towards outcomes on the OST. And so what we are actually getting ready to have come out to the schools here shortly are translation tables that actually take an iReady score and say, hey, if you have this iReady score at the middle of the year, this is what we would expect you to have on the OST at the end of the year based on prior student performance. I think that is probably one of the most straightforward ways to make that connection, so that if students exceed that score at the end of the year, then they have grown more than expected. If they get that score at the end of the year, they have, and of course we'll put a little error band on that. And if they've fallen far below it, then they haven't made the growth that would have been expected based on that iReady score. Again, we have 3 points of measurement during the course of the year. We have one at the beginning of the year, one at the middle of the year, and one at the end of the year. We know, and I've presented this to the board before, that our iReady and OST scores are very highly correlated. So having two tests that measure the same thing at the same time that are that highly correlated with one another is a loss of instructional time. Instructional time is our most valuable commodity. When we have students that are, many of our students, 1, 2 years behind, we need to take advantage of every moment of instruction. And I think the onus is, again, upon us to translate those scores so that the teachers can monitor growth.
So please clarify for me. So is there an end-of-the-year assessment that is currently or will be given to students to measure whether or not they've achieved that that growth that the OTS predicted that they would achieve?
So in kindergarten, first, and second grades, we use iReady for all 3 points. In 3 through 8, the final score, the one that determines the report card for us, is the Ohio State test. And so we will connect the dots between iReady, performance on iReady, and the Ohio State test. And ultimately, when we use iReady, we're trying to track performance to that OST. The OST is the end measure. It's the one that counts on the report card in the end. And yes, we can talk about growth on the OST from iReady. Yes.
And the OST, and iReady, that beginning of the year and that middle of year assessment also help to dictate the amount of intervention that students are receiving. And so depending on how students score at the beginning of the year and the middle of the year, if they're on grade level or above grade level, or 1 grade level below, 2 grade levels below, that intervention is tailored to that student's outcome, how they scored.
Excellent. Let me ask the question differently. I think one of the things that would be beneficial for our board is to see the growth that our students are having at the end of the year, right? That would give us an idea of, while they might be in a position to improve, to learn more, to get intervention or remediation, it would also be beneficial for us as well as their parents to see, well, this is how much growth was made. So that might help us in terms of our interpretation of data. So I just wanted to be clear that we do have a method of measuring that and that we'll get that moving forward.
Dr. Pierce, That's very important. Can you tie it back, though, to the monitoring calendar? Are you asking them to move
So,
one of the
Not that they move it, but in the past monitoring reports, Dr. Brown has done this in 2 of the reports that he's given to us. He's been able to show that growth. And so, again, the question is, as we're monitoring, specifically, if we want to tie, you could bring it in May, which Board Member Vera is saying that's a little late for our kindergartners and first graders. They're June is too late for you.
So are you saying that it might be that perhaps there's something else we need? So I want to get back to the topic because it's really important what you're talking about. The actual calendar. So
we
are you saying
monitor-
there's
we
something
monitor-
missing on the calendar?
We monitor to be able to see where our students are.
Yes.
What we're not going to see in this report, as is right now, is the growth that our students are making. And so when Board Member Cole said, what are we missing? When Board Member Reyes said, are we getting it too late? What I would like to know is how we can, within this calendar, be sure that we're providing a measure, a metric of growth, but that it's showing at the end of the year. So it also kind of goes against what Board Member Vera is saying in terms of we need that data earlier.
I thought that the model, correct me, somebody who does this better, that we're actually supposed to look at these several times a year, not just once a year.
Yeah, I think there's 2 kind of things happening here. I am sure that our administration and our teachers and our principals in our buildings are looking at this data that Dr. Pierce is referring to. And I'm sure they're looking at it all the time. And can I just finish for a minute? And
Clarify with the data that I'm looking at.
the growth and the growth at the end of the year.
End of the year, yes.
Yeah, the end of the year growth. Like that as a matter of course, and I think this is what Dr. Chapman was saying a few minutes ago when she kind of said, let's clarify this a little bit. I think if we as a board would like to see that data as well, just for informational purposes, we can ask for it just like we can ask for anything because we're, entitled to information that already exists to be shared with us. And that's perfectly appropriate. Whether it's not necessarily, or it is not, to be incorporated in this monitoring process because we, when we set this up, decided what our touch points were to monitor progress. And it's sort of what President Dare said, which is the purpose of this is a little bit different than the actual data. It's more to be ongoing and to see the growth year over year and to start the process of we're tracking these things and seeing if you're on track, off track, on track, off track. And it's really an evaluation of the superintendent. And that's, and we've decided this is the way we're going to evaluate because the risk we have, can I just finish though? The risk we have is that, the wisdom in this model, let me say it this way, is that we're deciding the wildly important goals and we're monitoring the heck out of them because if everything's important, then nothing's important. And this doesn't mean that we're not entitled to see these things and doesn't mean that the staff is not paying incredibly close attention to them and reacting to them and monitoring them and strategizing about it and that we're entitled to see that. But in terms of our monitoring, it's not supposed to be part of that.
Hold on. Well, hold on. It's Colden Pierce, then Reyes.
Thank you, Madam President. I think that the data that you're going to be looking for, that we're all going to be looking for, has the opportunity to be caught on the calendar. Whether it's in June, it's just a matter of us deciding what month where it's optimally available for us to see it, because you've had the time to tabulate it and present it. So if that's a June date, if that's, some date post-October, I don't know. I think it's incumbent of you guys to give us some wise counsel around what date we should optimally look for that data that you're asking for to be available. I think it could be easily incorporated into this calendar.
Dr. Pierce.
So not, your request was that the data comes earlier than what's in here right now for May. Did I miss the date? So my request is that Because right now, we're using OST to measure growth. My request is in our.
So for clarity,
iReady.
K3 is
iReady.
iReady.
Are we talking iReady. My request is that in our August, in that guardrail monitoring report, can we get the growth data then? Because that's end of the year, how students have performed across grade band to show us their growth. Did they hit the mark in terms of?
So, again, going back to the model, just for clarity, because in trying to put this together, it's a bit of a chessboard trying to arrange everything and try to make it work. And part of the challenge is all the data comes at one time. So, and the model we're supposed to be monitoring periodically. So, when we look at board goals, the board goals are the evaluative component. They're summative. They're what we look at the end. So we look at third grade reading. That's a summative goal connected to the OST. We look at graduation. It's a summative goal tied to how many kids cross the stage. The interim goals are whether or not kids are making progress towards that. And with regard to iReady, when we set these interims, we set them at the middle of the year. So the apples to apples comparison is middle of year to middle of year to middle of year in terms of growth. It's mid-year growth. To switch the interims around would be resetting the whole model.
No, I'm not asking to switch the interims around. My request is, in this August meeting, when we're thinking about support and intervention services, equitable resources, when we're thinking about how can we staff, that we also have data that's showing us the growth points for our students. That data, I would like that data to be a measure of their total year. So at the end of the year, the request from my colleagues right now is that we get that data earlier throughout this calendar, which is fine. I'm more focused on end of the year growth. And when are we seeing that data? Because right now, we're not going to see that data as we readily saw it. You guys are going to focus on, here's the iReady data, here's our test score data. My request is, in that August meeting where we're gearing up for, how are we aligning with our guardrails? Let's show the growth moment.
Clarifying question?
Yes.
I may. Dr. Pierce, you're asking for end-of-year growth data in support of the board goal around early literacy? So
In support of the board guardrails around support intervention services and equitable resources.
Another clarifying question.
Yes.
The data that you want to see in August, when we are monitoring that guardrail, support intervention services, the data that you want to see, though, is related to the early literacy goal.
It's related to end of the year growth.
So end of the year growth data,
What are you
the growth
measuring?
data that we have is for iReady for reading and math.
So if they're taking iReady,
She's talking about
kindergarten, first, second, third, and eighth, right? And they have the anticipated score that they should show at the end of the year on something. Is there a last assessment that they take that says, hey, yes, they would achieve that score?
This sounds like another board goal.
So I don't think it's
I don't want
a
it
guard
to go.
for it. So I think you said you wanted to. You're putting this around the guardrail.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that we've identified what we're measuring in that guardrail yet. They haven't told us what they're measuring. I hear what you're saying. So I think that this I think we're just like circling right now because I think you're talking about something that differently, right, than we've talked about before, and that's okay. But I think the team needs to go back and think about that. And then what is it that in that guardrail around equitable resources, what is it we're looking at? And what are the actual measurements that you guys have said? Because maybe it's not what she just said at all. And we can talk about that. But I think this needs more discussion because that's not, and that's fine. But I did want to say about the calendar, I mean, I think you said, traditionally you guys have done one time a month. I mean, if we want things earlier, we just know in certain month, we just have 2. And that's okay if we want it earlier. If we think that that's better, that makes the data better, that makes decision-making better. I don't think we need to stick to 1 a month.
And can I just ask one more?
Oh, wait, hold on, sorry, I got to get back to my list. You can,
You responded to the point.
you can clarify, and then it's going to go to Reyes, then back to Beckerly, and then we're going to have to
Awesome.
be done with this
Thank you.
conversation.
So just in terms of us approving this monitoring calendar, what we're missing is the end of the year growth mark for our students. And as a board, as an administration, we need to give that thought.
Well, we're not missing it. It just wasn't a goal we selected. So it's not a monitor, but they could provide that in a superintendent report or
that's the
something else.
request.
It doesn't need to be a monitoring.
And don't put it on the calendar, but can I just add something?
It's Reyes. Oh, okay.
Does it help if, I mean, the thing is, whenever we talk about kindergarten or first grade in a monitoring session, we are going to be measuring growth from the year before to that current year. And it might be mid-year to mid-year growth as opposed to end-of-the-year growth to end-of-year growth. But in terms of are our kids growing at greater than a year's worth of growth in a year, we're getting that information. Is that accurate?
It's within year.
Getting that.
So it's whether or not students are, from the beginning of the year to mid-year, are they on track to, at that point in time, have they exceeded their growth expectation at that point in time?
But just for the past 3 months?
It would be through the middle part of the year, which is, I think,
Okay.
slightly more than 3 months on that.
But
It's also the window of time where, frankly, the majority of growth occurs for most kids around the country.
Okay. And I was thinking that we were going to see year to year. Because sometimes you see, never mind, okay. I'm wrong, that's not helping.
That's what my question was, because you were saying you were getting interim and then final.
So, again, the way this was set up with the student outcomes focused governance, the board has a goal, it's around third grade literacy.
Yep.
That is the final goal, it's the goal that we all look at in the end, and it's what we're trying to improve. When we look at what's going on from kindergarten to first to second grade, we're looking at the proportion of students who are either reading at grade level or making stretch growth. Because if they make stretch growth, then they're on track to close that gap over time. And we're trying to incentivize growth for our schools and our students and our teachers. We want to acknowledge growth when it happens. Because if a teacher is working with a group of students that are 2 or more years behind, but they're making exceptional growth, by all means, we want to acknowledge that. And we also want to acknowledge that for those kids, that those kids are doing what they need to do to move forward. Again, we've set that up as a mid-year target. We look again at the end of the year. Teachers and parents have that information at the end of the year to know where students are with that. But for the purpose of an interim goal to know whether or not, again, looking from year to year, are we making progress or not, our apples to apples comparison is a mid-year to mid-year to mid-year, and that's how we set it up back in, when we did this. Again, one of the constraints has been trying to make sure that we have something every month. Well, that means some of the data gets lagged, and so if we want to do more things earlier and not have something 1 month, then that would be a choice for the board, by all means. But again, one of the drivers there was to try to have something every month for the conversation.
I think that's a bad, make it make sense.
When it makes sense, yeah.
When it makes sense, we should talk about it. And if that means we have 3 monitoring sessions in a row, we don't have 2, then we pick up another, whatever. I think we have to make it make sense so that we can be in the moment to use and appreciate the data, right?
Again, that was a constraint that I was working with. It's an easy one to remove.
Yeah.
Again, I would probably prioritize starting with things that have less of an on-ramp to do something about. So 11th grade on track for graduation, to me, has a little bit more weight than where we are in 9th grade. And the same thing for second grade literacy is going to carry a little bit more weight than kindergarten and first. But we definitely can look at that if we remove that constraint that we have to have something on for every month.
Yeah, it would, I would agree. That's why I was kind of like wondering how that, it should jive with how you're seeing the data. Why, you know, if you know how you're seeing the data and when you need to apply the interventions. So that's when the data should come to you, to us. The interim goal should be, this is what we're doing. That's when we ask the questions, well, did you think this? Did you think that? Did we do this? Did we do that? Or whatever that is. And then back to what Board Member Beckerly said, which I think we were kind of negating, is then the final report of whether we met, didn't meet, it is technically evaluation of the superintendent because the goals are the goals of the district. So, yeah, I would go back that way. I'm glad we talked enough so we could answer so we could remove that barrier.
Well, that's why I wanted you guys to understand those priorities. How did what were the constraints that I used to try to put this together? And if you guys want to remove one of those constraints, then it gives us greater flexibility to think about what that calendar looks like.
And make it make more sense.
There you go.
So then, because we are supposed to do something in February and we haven't re-adopted the calendar, I mean, are we still okay to do the 11th grade?
Yes.
Are you still planning on that? And then we can come back and tweak this calendar, keep working at it, and then approve it. I know that's not SOGF, it's supposed to be approved first, but.
Well, maybe we do two monitoring sessions. We move the third grade reading up if it's available. Is it available in February or it's not
Would
available?
you look at it again and bring it back?
Yeah.
I'd be happy.
All right, good.
Because it's not like we lack any things that are not going on in the district. And we talked, there's other things, and that's what we come back with.
But I wouldn't hesitate to do two sessions in February if that makes sense based on what you would normally look at anyway.
Yeah.
So my gut response just on this would be to keep things clustered.
Yeah.
So if we're going to talk about high school, let's talk about high school.
Yep.
And then we'll come back and talk about early childhood. That I think would fit more with, again, how we're most likely internally to be responding to said data.
That's a good idea.
There you go.
Just a reminder, everyone, we are still learning through this, and we're going to try some things where we might hate it. We're going to try something else, we might hate that, and eventually we're going to figure it out. But we've never really had a discussion at this kind of level at the table, and so this is demonstrating our own growth and the importance of, you know, us monitoring this for our children, which is our job as the Board of Education. So we are not perfect. We are learning, and we're going to continue to learn. So thank you, board members. Thank you, team. We will keep working on the calendar and keep working on these monitoring and our goals and portrait and all of it. Back to you, Dr. Chapman, if there's anything else you wanted to add in this section.
No, certainly thank you for your feedback. Remember, this feedback is really helpful for us because the board goals and the monitoring calendar, and the guardrails, this is the work that the board has set for us. And so we don't have the liberty to change it without having these conversations at the board table with you, with everyone at the board table to discuss, you know, where we need to pivot, where we need to change. So thank you for the conversation.
Thank you, team. All right, we're going to go to item 7.3. We have an update from our ad hoc committee on structure of board work. Vice President Vera and Dr. Pierce are working on that. I'm going to turn it over to them for an update.
Thank you, Madam President. So we are really excited to be able to share an updated illustration of just our work thus far, but really also wanting to provide just kind of some framework around how we are going to move in this space. Just to kind of remind each of us, you know, a big part of what we have been charged with is to be able to really monitor our focus in terms of our committee work as it relates and aligns with our goals and our guardrails. Also looking at just our present committee structure and our policies around board committees. So this ad hoc committee will be able to bring some recommendations back to this board. So that is our objective. We wanted just to highlight just kind of some our strategy, kind of what we will be charging each one of you with in process of getting us ready for this. So Dr. Pierce and I have already been in conversation with the Council of Great City Schools. AJ Crabhill has been a huge partner of ours in supporting a lot of different things on our board work. And so we have had the opportunity just to kind of sit with him and talk to him a little bit about this idea of really looking at structuring our board work. And so creating a framework around how we are going to collect the data to be able to collectively have that conversation. So we have been able to identify a framework, what kind of tool we'll use, which will allow us to also identify from each committee chair, co-chair, administrative staff that's a part of that, committee members themselves, to be able to have a voice in the evaluation process. So there will be a survey assessment that Dr. Pierce and I are working alongside of AJ to create that will be sent out to all of the members I mentioned earlier. And with that data, we'll be able to come back to this board to analyze that data. So we'll collect all of that, share it with you in advance as we do with everything, and be able to come to the board table to really have, just deep conversation about our work and the effectiveness of our work. Not from a place of we're not being effective, but we want to be extremely intentional and strategic with our time and our resources. And so just being able to take an opportunity to see, what's working, what's not working, what we might need additional support on. And so that information will be what we are looking for as we're analyzing that data. We'll be able to share that with our board colleagues, be able to get additional recommendations from the Council of Great City Schools, just as we have that data readily available, get their insight, and then be able to come back and have board discussion and input. So we really will need every board member's kind of opinion once we are able to collect all that data. And then working alongside of our board colleague, Brown, just to be able to review the policy as it relates to board committees. And so really wanting to, and I know also Beckerly, board member Beckerly had interest in being a part of that policy conversation, as well as connecting with our legal counsel just on compliance to make sure we are on track with any decisions we are deciding as a body. Then ultimately we will be able to provide a recommendation for our 2023 and beyond committee structure, as well as provide recommendations for policy on board committees. Dr. Pierce, anything you want to add?
You did an excellent job, Vice President Vera. Good job. Way to go.
Other questions? That was an excellent job. And I think that, one of the things in this process, and I think you said it best just about our children and the way that they learn in 2023, we have to adapt as a board too and be flexible and change maybe the way that we govern. And maybe it isn't these traditional standing committees that we have had for a long period of time. So I'm excited about this work. Thank you for this structure. I think it looks amazing. And board colleagues, I want you to know that because Vice President Vera is leading this committee, I've also asked her to kind of oversee the committee work and the ad hocs at this moment in time because she's gathering all the data. So if she contacts you and asks you questions or wants to know the status of something, that is why. And so she is charged with kind of keeping that and making sure too that we're getting the regular report out at board meetings on all of our work. So thank you for that, Vice President Vera. And this looks great.
Thank you. And if I may add, we are meeting with AJ tomorrow evening just to kind of go over the assessment. So one of the things that, we really need your help with, board members, is just to be able to really fill out the assessment in a timely manner because we don't want this to drag on. Our goal is to be able to have recommendations in March. That would be ideal for us. So being able to, get the assessment, fill it out alongside of your co-chairs, encourage your committee members, just so that they have a heads up that this is coming. So we want to work with you on the communication for your committees so that they are aware of the tool and the assessment. We can answer any questions that they may have, but it'll be a short assessment. It's not going to be long in length, maybe 5 to 6 questions. And so it will be direct input from them. So we just want to be able to remind the importance of time. And so when we send this assessment out, the sooner we can get the information back, we can then collectively have the conversation about how we move forward in that space.
Thank you.
I have some.
Board Member Beckerly.
Okay, I'm going back to when you asked us if we had anything to say when we finished talking about Office of Internal Audit report. There's also a survey that we've all received from Kevin.
Oh,
No,
talking about another survey.
there's another survey that I wanted to remind everyone about, and Carolyn, maybe you can explain it in more detail, but just, I mean, it doesn't need to be explained, just that Kevin sent us all out a survey that's part of their effort with the Council of Great City Schools, that we're supposed to complete that as well. Yeah. Well, we can. Has been. We need to, that's why I'm nagging. This is a nagging announcement.
Schools and other school districts, basically being part of a pilot to try to determine if there is alignment between the superintendent, the treasurer, the chief audit executive, and the boards in regards to what we all view as the most pressing risks facing our districts. So I believe it's a pretty simple survey. Just click a few buttons. If you have any questions, by all means, reach out to me or Mr. Sanikowski, and we can guide you through it. But, hopefully, we can work through the bugs, and then if it is beneficial, it'll go out to other member Council of Great City School District schools next year.
And I'll ask him to send it again.
Okay, thanks. All right. We're going to go to item 8, which is our consent agenda. Tonight's consent agenda consists of item 9.1 to 24.8. Are there any items a board member would like to remove for separate consideration? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the
Move
consent?
to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Are there any items for discussion? I just wanted to highlight that we do have some purchases here that continue to demonstrate the need for our permanent improvement levy. We are purchasing buses, which was a decision that we had made to put funds aside to replace our buses on a regular cycle so that we are not in situations where they are breaking down. And that, again, is a smart move. We want to continue that effort with other parts of our district, and that is why I'm seeking permanent improvement levy funding is so important, so we have that dedicated fund. So that's just an example that I wanted to highlight that's on our agenda that this board is committed to doing and continues to commit to doing, and that is to go ahead and do that regular life cycle replacement. So that's on here. Anybody else? Okay, please call the roll.
Ms. Beckerly?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cole?
Yes.
Dr. Pierce?
With the exception of 10.1, which I am abstaining, yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
Vice President Vera?
Yes.
President Adair?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. We're now going to move into our public comment on non-agenda items. We have a few people in person and I believe one person virtual this evening. I think we're starting with a virtual person. I see our board liaison Nichols is up there on the screen. We have Lakeisha Jefferson. She is here to discuss transportation concerns. Action requested. Have transportation have a continuous improvement plan during the transition. Board liaison Nichols, do you have the caller?
The caller's on the line.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Jefferson, you have 3 minutes to address the board. You may begin at any time.
Great, thank you, and good evening. I appreciate this opportunity to get in front of you all. And I think I may become a permanent fixture of the transportation concern, just to make sure that we stay in front of this for continued process improvement. Because it seems like with the new system, with talking to the customer service representative, it's more work for them as far as where they were once able to see it housed in one area. Now they have to go through different screens to put it all together to even understand, to even service us. And this is after waiting 45 minutes most of the time, which is the average, on hold to even get a person on the line. So another thing that that would help to in the dynamics of moving this process to improve the process is definitely establishing some type of customer service philosophy. I know that you know, we have a unique dynamic of parents we deal with in our district. Not everyone, you know, have very colorful vocabulary, just to kind of paint it in that picture and that light. However, there are those that I've always had my professional hat on. I'm a community leader in the 43227 area as well as the 43232 area. But most often I find myself more on the emotional side, because when you're dealing with people's children and wanting to know the status of where they are, then, you know, you're kind of like more in your emotional space, and they're not even seeming as if they have the ability to diffuse situations. They only escalate the situations by how they handle something so sensitive to a parent. So I actually have something currently pending. I just want to get back in front of the board to say, we do appreciate you all pushing the narrative to get us buses. My daughter does have an AM and PM bus, but what we have to understand is now that she has an AM bus, she was taken on a bus from a bus that was 28 students to now over 60 students on the bus. Now, I know that there's a capacity of the bus with 75 when it comes to her age group, but that's still an overcrowding, and we're still dealing with some remnants of COVID, and there's no, I mean, again, it's not recommended, I'm sorry, but it's not mandatory, but we still should have some things in place to safeguard our children. And I just want this to be something that's continued to be in front of the board, again, to understand how we can continue to improve processes with the transportation. So I won't keep it, I'll digress there, and definitely this is something I continue to work, I intend to continue to work with offline with the Department of Transportation. I know Ryan Weinheimer is no longer there. I have a call out to Mimi, which is the supervisor of, I believe, the Freedom compound, I believe. And so I'm just waiting for even the connectivity with the leadership. It's not there. So whatever we can do in the community to kind of help support the initiative, collaborate, to have a parent understanding, because communication is key, and we're still dropping the ball on communication. So I definitely would like to see how does this, as far as with the direction we're going with improving the process, how can we continue to just keep the communication
Thank you, Ms.
open-ended?
Jefferson. The board does absolutely agree with you on continuous improvement. Thank you for lifting some of the issues. Our transportation supervisor was writing feverishly, and we will make sure that you are contacted. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Our next speaker is here in person, Monica Gabriel. Topic, middle of the year update, action requested, implement and make changes. Good evening, Ms. Gabriel. You have 3 minutes to address the board.
Thank you. Good evening. Many of you know me from approaching the board in August of 2022. For those of you who don't, my name is Monica Gabriel, proud mother of 4 amazing smart children. I'm coming to you with some of the middle of the year updates and unanswered concerns. After the last meeting, I was pulled to the side and given empty promises of getting change, meetings for support and help. I have only met one time with Mr. Nelson, who also made statements he couldn't hold up to, and little communication. I also spoke to a board member voicing numerous concerns of targeting my children, as well as other ideas to help with issues, but there is little change. Let me be clear. Announcing your arrival and showing your face for photo ops to make the board look good is not what I meant when I said placing yourself in these buildings. It defeats the purpose. What I meant was spend a week with these kids day in and day out to see the struggles and challenges they face. Then maybe you'll spark some change and implement some real change for these kids in our future. I'll start with my daughter, who is currently a 10th, 11th split student and still struggling. This has been ongoing since the pandemic, and most of her learning is online and still not helpful. How can we ensure she's on track to graduate? How can we make sure that she's going to pass? What more can be done to make sure these students that are in jeopardy this year as well graduate? The graduation rates aren't looking very well. Next, we have my 3rd grade son. The 3rd grade reading guarantee is now being implemented again, which now puts my son at risk of being retained. It's like history repeating itself. He is one of the top readers in his class in small group, but still below grade level in reading. How and why was this able to be in effect when the Ohio Department of Education's early literacy report card shows only 35.1% are proficient and 85% of those students remain off track? Teachers and students are working so hard, and again, I'll ask you, what can be done to help my student and these other students? Last, We have the targeting and disrespect that my children and I feel. It's been 4+ years of me being passionate and downright desperate for help with these children, to only be met with sarcasm and annoyance when I ask for your help. I just want to have clarity that this is not meant for most of the people we've encountered, only a select few, and during incidents where I speak up. My children have encountered some great teachers, so thank you to all of them. I'll also say this, I'm my only child's advocate, and I will not stop until we get some change. I have high hopes with this new superintendent that we need people that are compassionate as I am to ensure our children don't become another statistic in this community. Communication is key for my children's success. Let's figure this out for my children of the future and help my children. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gabriel. We appreciate your advocacy, and we'll have a member of the team get in contact with you. Our last speaker is Dreanne Zimmerman. Topic, transportation in Columbus City Schools. Action requested, show accountability, responsibility, and have honest transparency. You have 3 minutes to address the board.
Good evening. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I am a parent who came before you at the November 1st, 2022 board meeting regarding Transportation Department of Columbus City Schools. This evening, I have returned in hopes to gain your attention and action for my 2nd and 3rd grader at Hubbard Elementary. Also, they're back there. While I appreciate the action taken from my last expressed concerns, the implementation of the transportation reliability improvement measures has unraveled our previous progress. Since my presence at the last meeting, their bus stop was changed because you agreed that the location was unsafe due to no streetlights or sidewalks. Thank you. However, the new changes moved that bus stop to a location even further than the initial stop with the same barriers. Let me remind you that my mother, who is also present this evening, is 73 years old. I had mentioned she has no vehicle of her own and assist us in getting the children to and from the bus stop. She can't do that anymore because of the location. This morning, I received a call reporting that the bus stop would be changed, effective this coming Monday. Thank you. However, Monday is still to come, and because I am here again, I am not 100% optimistic that this change will be completely resolved next week. I chose to still come here today to let you know that the process of getting results and actions has not been easy for us. Thus far, I have utilized 12 hours of my personal work time and my lunch time to get my children to and from the current bus stop. Although you report successes with this new measure, we have experienced buses that are still late on an average of 25 minutes and inconsistent drivers. We called transportation before, during, and after the winter break. I received no answer. We called between 10 and 2, like you said. I received no answer. Often on hold for over an hour, the lines disconnected me, and when I finally reached someone, they said, sorry, it's after 2 p.m., and we don't handle those concerns. 2 representatives took my contact information because I expressed the inability to call every day because of my work schedule, but I did not get a call back. Last week, my husband finally got through. They took steps to move the bus stop and the location to a location that's still at barriers. My husband's parents have been going to this new location, and guess what? The bus is going to the old stop. With the bus arriving at different times and us having to juggle a guessing game between those 2 bus stops, we've missed our children 3 times, and they've had to walk in the neighborhood by themselves. They're 2nd and 3rd graders. We have given you flexibility and understanding, meaning my family and other parents, but we're tired, overwhelmed, nervous, frustrated. What do you leave us to do? Why do I have to come all the way here to this meeting to try to get action and response to my situation? There are other parents that have the same concerns who cannot get here. They cannot do the same thing, so I stand for them as well. You are hurting our families. I acknowledge your improvement, but you're still hurting us. If you have that many calls, I encourage you to reassess the plan. Something is still wrong. I need the district to be accountable, reliable, and give us honest transparency. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate your continued advocacy, and a member of our team will talk with you right now.
I appreciate that. Thank you so very much.
Okay, board members, next on our agenda is executive session. Vice President Reyes, you have the motion.
I have it.
How about Vice President Vera?
I'm sorry,
Vera.
Vice President Vera.
I do.
Sorry,
I
that
saw the
is
panic
such a
on your
habit.
face. I was like, I have
had to
it.
learn.
I can make it up.
So sorry. So sorry for the confusion. I was like, what?
It's January.
I know. I move that the Board of Education recess into executive session per section 121.22 G1 Ohio Revised Code to consider the appointment, employment of or compensation of public employees, and per section 121.22 G3 Ohio Revised Code to confer with an attorney for the public body concerning disputes involving the public body that are subject of pending or imminent court action, and per section 121.22 G4 to prepare for, conduct, or review negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Cole?
Yes.
Dr. Pierce?
She said yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
Vice President Vera?
Yes.
President Adair?
Yes.
Ms. Beckerly?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. We will now adjourn to executive session and come back to close the meeting here publicly. However, it will not be televised. So for staff and audience, thank you for attending today. And we will take, like a 5-minute break, board members, please, and get back to the room. Thank you all so much.